Well, it's Groundhog Day, and we already depend on the rodent to predict the weather. Welcome to Small Talk.
Any and all are welcome here to come and chat with me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. And speaking of welcoming, I'd like to welcome back a previous guest, Ken King. Hey, Ken.
How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing good. And how are things? So you're in Seychelles, right?
I'm in Seychelles, correct. The weather's nice here. It's quite pleasant.
Very good. So, tell us why you're back.
Yeah, we're talking about, what you do is so wonderful that people really don't understand exactly what it is that you're doing. You're doing something called competent communication. So I thought it would be an opportunity to share some thoughts on this. This is something I teach at the university level, and it would be something that I think our listeners might find quite interesting when they really realize some of the aspects to what they're doing could be really helpful for them, whatever they're trying to do.
Sounds good.
Okay, so one thing that's really important to know that when we communicate amongst ourselves, really it's a process and it's symbology. Like the noises I'm making right now, you recognize as words and you process that inside your brain, and we're communicating on that basis. But different languages, different inflections, everything can mean different things. So when we're talking about communicating, we are talking about a really complex situation. And what we're trying to do is transfer information. And doing so, we're doing so on the basis of information that might be factual, it might be perceived, it might be believed, or it might be influencing. In other words, I might be transferring information to you that I want you to do something. So I'm trying to influence you. So if you have a basis of understanding some of those things and understanding the difference between whether you're talking about communication on the basis of a relational, giving instructions, or rhetorical where you're having a conversation, we often have this really complex relationship with how we talk, how we write, how we communicate with each other. So one of the things that really came out of understanding communications and how we work with each other is developing skills in something called competent communication. So competent communication itself has rules, and you've already observed many of these rules in your small talk program. So I think it's kind of fun to kind of talk about what those things are. So really what you want to do is when you're communicating with each other, and it really is the basis of our relationships with each other and in society as a whole, you want to be able to do so competently so that there's fewer misunderstandings and there's a more efficient movement towards ideals and goals. Everybody's basically finding better ways to do this. So in doing that, we want to recognize a number of things that are barriers to competent communication. And I know you've dealt with that. So one of the first barriers you have are external noises.
Right.
You'll have somebody walk in the background, or vehicles will go by, anything like that. That's a barrier, it's obviously. You also have psychological noise. I can't help what you're thinking at this time, regardless of what I'm saying to you. So that's going to have an effect on how you communicate with me. And also physiological noise. One of the things that's often asked by lecturers is everybody comfortable? Because if they can get people to a low physiological noise, they're comfortable, they're willing to listen, that makes it much easier. So if you've got those three noise barriers in mind, then you'll know at times there are better, and we've all dealt with this, there are better times to deal with a certain subject than there are others. So if those noise barriers are there, they can be really problematic. So you want to get around that. Then we also have a number of environmental barriers that we need to deal with. And these environmental barriers include things like language, and they include things like your culture and generational differences that we might have between us. Now, you and I probably don't have any generational differences, so we don't carry that barrier forward. But then there's gender differences, and your understanding of the information I'm giving you could be quite different than what I'm saying to you. And there's also a perceived relative wealth. And I don't mean that in the pure monetary sense, but relative wealth actually has a real effect on levels of understanding and education. So relative wealth is also important. And of course, status, class status is a barrier as well, potentially. And then finally, we have the message barriers, which we have to worry about. And these are things that as a competent communicator, you really can do something about. First off, non-clarity, foggy, obtuse, anything that creates a bit of ambiguity in a message is problematic for competent communication. So clarity is really important. Also, if your message lacks integrity, we often call this lying, but there are degrees to lying that people won't recognize. You know, they call it the white lie, or I'm just kind of shading it this way or that way. That lacks integrity. And of course, the non-listening. Now, I'm talking to you right now, but if you had something you wanted to express back to me, it's important that I stop and listen to you.
Right.
So those are really important message barriers. So we've got the three types of barriers. We have the noise barriers, we have the environmental barriers, and we have the message barriers. And they're really important to recognize if you're trying to communicate with somebody. So things that are true about being a competent communicator is these statements that are really important. First off, all communication is fluid, or it should be, so it's not static. So even your head gestures, even your small little comments back to me, really valuable as far as getting great communication. All good communication is relational. It's not individual. It's important that I get information feedback from you or from somebody else so that the information I'm providing you, the communication I'm giving you, is more relevant. There is no ideal way to communicate, and everybody has a different pattern out there, and you have to be willing to accept that pattern to help communicate better. So what makes you more comfortable communicating may not be comfortable for somebody else, so you need to adjust to that. And competence in communicating is always situational. So your situation will change how you can communicate. The way you might communicate in an emergency situation would be different if you're in a conversational situation. Is a good example. And of course, you can always learn. We're always learning communication skills. And there isn't a day go by that I don't learn something new about how to communicate. So some of the things that you might want to consider when you're looking at your show is all these areas that you've expressed very, very well on small talk is all representing forms of competent communication. You're very good at it. And so I wanted to bring that up as part of what we're kind of talking about today. Do you have any questions about this so far? Is this making some sense?
It does, because it reminds me, I went to Toastmasters for a number of years. So
right,
learning to communicate was important. That was the whole idea of going, right?
And Toastmasters is an excellent example of where you can learn to progress forward and pass information on. Competent communication is the next step where you're looking for feedback in to expand that. So Toastmasters is an excellent place to start. So competent communicators, first off, understand these barriers that we talked about before, and they exist, and you just have to recognize them. In some cases, you can do nothing about them.
Right. In
other cases, you can do some things to help break them down. So checking in with people, are you comfortable? This is making sense with you? Allowing them to give you some feedback and be willing to listen to what they have to say, because what they might tell you isn't what you might want to hear, but that's not what's important. It's they need to tell you something. They can also adjust their approach, and which is what you do. You know how to adjust your approach to get the other person to speak. You get them to get their information out, to get their emotions, their feelings out. That's really, really valuable. And in incredibly tense situations, that's critical. So one of the things you'll notice with individuals that deal with suicide prevention is they work really hard to break those barriers down and allow that person to express feelings. And that's a very powerful, powerful skill. And of course, competent communicators actually are chameleons. They have a wide range of behaviors they can call upon. to encourage communication. So in some cases, I can be angry. In some cases, I can be stoic. In some cases, I can be super friendly, whatever gets the right conversation going. And of course, competent communicators like you practice communicating. Not only do you do this small talk on a regular basis, but you probably run these scenarios through your head on your own quite a bit, don't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's called intrapersonal communication. And good, competent communicators have lots of intrapersonal communication. They talk to themselves.
Yeah.
And you do so it's a very healthy thing to do. You do so in a way to help sort out your thoughts, to clear down any confusion you might have, to break down these barriers we talked about so you're better at expressing yourself. So let's talk about some of your skills, some of your behaviors that help you be a competent communicator. You're empathetic. Now there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy means you're immersed in the other person's feeling and you go just along with them. But that's not really as valuable as being have empathy, which means that having empathy means you can understand where they're coming from and structure your discussion with them, your communication with them, so they get a chance to express their feelings. You're not taking over their feelings. So that's really valuable. So you, as a competent communicator, have empathy, and that's a huge talent. Another one which you have is cognitive complexity. You can understand different points of view, different situations, even if you've never been there. Mm-hmm. So you can construct this abstract in your mind when someone's speaking and you're having these discussions and saying, yes, I can potentially see that. And then you can bring in elements of your own experience that brings better color and life to that situation. So as a communicator, you're really encouraging the other person to share. You're also self-monitoring. You're always checking what you're saying, how you're reacting, how your body position is, everything. So this self-monitoring role is really important as a competent communicator. You also take perspectives. When the opportunity affords itself and you want more information from somebody, don't you offer a different perspective saying, well, what about? How would you approach this if it was this situation? So a competent communicator happily does that because offering the other party different perspectives frees them. Often when somebody's speaking to you, they're speaking from inside their own cage. When you give them perspective, you open that door. Mm-hmm. So it's really important. The other thing as a competent communicator is you're deferent. You give deference to the other person. Their position, their opinion is important to you, whether you agree with them or not. It's important to hear from them. And so that deference is really, really important. And think how powerful that is as a speaker and as a communicator when someone gives you their true feelings and you've made it safe for them to do that. Because you've said to them, it's important. I don't have to agree with you to hear from you. Right. So that's really, really powerful. So what you're looking at whenever you're getting into competent communications is finding different channels, different means, different ways to get to where that other person is coming from and what they need to say. So you're going through the three types of barriers, and you're using sets of skills that you've developed over time and you practice on a regular basis. So this is really why your show works extraordinarily well. Now, one of the things that competent communicators also understand is there's misconceptions out there about communication. So this is where we can have some fun. So let's have some discussion about this. My first question is the communication often associates around social rituals. So I might say, or I might ask you a question, how are you? Well, quite often, how would you respond?
Great.
Yeah, but do I want to drill down and say, well, are you really great?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Right.
Right? That's a social ritual you and I just went through. I
Right.
can ask you how you are, and you say, I'm great. In some cases, it's important to recognize the social ritual, and that's not important to the conversation. But if you were a doctor, or if I was a doctor and I asked you how you were and you said, great, I would have to ask you, could you explain that a little bit more? Why are you here? So competent communication recognizes when it's a social ritual or when it's important to break that down and do something else. Have you been in a situation where you really needed to ask more?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, but you've been afraid because of the social ritual that's there to break that down. Well, it might be intrusive, it might be rude. Why would I ask more? So just recognize that. Also recognize that there's general influence out there that really colors our conversation with somebody. So the societal influence, television and radio, and even this show could have influence on others and how they may want to speak to somebody else or how they may want to approach it. So today's discussion is all about how do you break that down?
Right.
How do you get to the meat of the matter? Also be careful of communicators who are out there and they have deliberate ambiguity or deception. We call them liars, but it's far more pervasive and far more tricky than that. It's not just a simple, straightforward deception. You can have shading, or you can have gaslighting, you can have all sorts of factors that really ruin communication because it's directional, it's incentivized. So you want to be careful with that. And of course, you want to coordinate your action in your conversation with the other person talking with you. Have you ever been in a situation where both speakers are so animated, they're so excited about what they're discussing that it almost feels like a movement?
Like a what?
Like a movement, like everybody's kind of channeled into one force. They want to do something.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's called coordinate action.
Oh, okay.
And you can do that in your communication. You can also be in a situation where you have these discussions and it's not coordinated. The boring lecturer, right? So
Yeah.
if someone's just lecturing you, yeah, you hear it, but you're not taking in the information. So you need to have coordinate action. And so communication doesn't always equal understanding. It does take these additional skills to get that understanding and to recognize when individuals are being ambiguous or deceptive, and recognizing when we have social rituals that can get in the way. So other myths we want to expose. I have a discussion question for you.
Okay.
Is communication always a good thing?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
Isn't it a good question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Aren't there times where you really don't want to know what someone has to say?
Yeah, definitely.
Aren't there times where you really need to hear what they have to say, but they can't express it?
Yes.
So as a competent communicator, how do you get around that? How do you work with that? Big challenge.
Yeah.
Another one for you. Is there any single person or event that causes another person's reaction?
Yes.
Or you don't know the history of somebody, you don't know the background.
Right.
So one of the things we get into when we start talking about that is, do I need to step back and say, did I cause this? Or did that person cause this? Or is there something bigger here?
Right.
Another one, communication will solve all problems.
No.
Or what levels of communication are we talking about? Exactly. So these are things you're always wrestling with in your mind. That's why I bring these questions out. Meanings will rest with people and not the words. Yes or no?
Meanings or meetings?
No, meanings.
Meanings.
The meaning of something.
Well,
Remember now, all communication is symbolic.
okay.
So the noises I make, you recognize as words. My gestures, you'll recognize as something else. The way I dress, the way I look, everything. they're all symbolic.
Right.
So the meanings, are they the words or are they with the person that's receiving it?
That's receiving. Oh,
Because I could mean something entirely different and you're not getting it.
yeah.
So the meanings are only important with the receiving person, not with the person making it.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't actually mean that you shouldn't take great care to be clear in your meaning.
Right.
So this is why this is huge. That's why your show is so popular. That's why it's so meaningful, because you do this intrinsically. You're not breaking it down like I am. I'm dissecting it. I'm kind of laying it out on the plate. And you're kind of going, oh, wow, we never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
The other one, communication is a simple thing. True or false?
Oh, I would say false.
Yes. And yet we can have very simple communications that are very powerful. You tell your daughter you love her. Now that means a lot of things to her.
Right.
But it's a very simple communication. Right?
Mm-hmm.
A smile is a simple communication, but what does it mean?
Right.
All right. And yet we can have elaborate discussions which seem to be very complex, but they're covering relatively simple subjects. Okay. Is more communication better?
Not necessarily.
Depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So everything's situational.
Right.
So one of the exciting things about having this discussion with you today is to use what you do as a basis to explain what we're just talking about. And it means a lot, I think, when others can listen to these discussions and start relating it to their communications they have between other people that they might deal with. So that's a really powerful set of tools. So competent communication is really a skill set that we develop beyond a program like Toastmasters.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the small talk really, it was a great example for me and thank you for allowing me to speak about it, but it was a great example, a living example in front of me that I could use as a basis to explain the points that are involved with communicating.
I have no problem being used. Sorry.
Used in the nicest of ways.
I had to do that.
You are a shining example of what we should be looking towards.
Thank you. Well, it's kind of interesting because I see my job or what I do as more of a listener. I want you to talk.
Which is one of the key skills of a competent communicator.
Right.
But my job today was to relate what those skills were and bring you back into the conversation.
Right.
Now we've had a richer dialogue on your show than if I would have just rattled on about something I like to do.
One of the things I like about what you were just doing, it's this looking at each other and communicating, because I don't communicate well over the phone.
Right.
Or in text, although I love texting more than anything. I prefer texting to phone calling or talking on the phone. And of course, as you know, the reason why like this is better is because you can see a lot of the communication is, I think you said it at the beginning, so you can see the movement, you can see the facial gestures, you can pick up so much more by looking at a person and speaking to them, right?
Correct. One of the largest parts of our brain is the occipital. I can't even say it correctly. I just had some tea. The part of the brain that does vision.
Okay.
Because we're very visually focused.
Right.
And so much of our communication is involved with gestures and body language. Even the way we dress has a lot to do with the influence in the communication that we're giving. And that's why I said all communication is symbolic.
Right.
You know, what would it matter if you think about it? What would it matter whether I move my hand one way or the other, or what I'm dressed as, any of that? It wouldn't matter. So it becomes more problematic when you're on the phone, you don't get that, or on text. But there are some opportunities for you to take some perspective taking for yourself and imagine you're that person in the room where you're writing the text. or imagine that person in front of you when you're on the phone.
Right. Right.
See, that's that intrapersonal communication you're having. That improves all of it. After a while, you become really comfortable speaking with individuals on an email or on text or over the phone, because you've put yourself in that, you've done this intrapersonal communication with yourself, and you put yourself into a kind of a proxy visual state that really improves communication. That opens up your mind. You become a better communicator because of that.
Right. That's cool. That's so.
Yeah, no, it's a good skill and it's one that, as I say, I'm always learning new skills. I have individuals who communicated to me in different ways, and I've picked up some of the some of the aspects that they've given that allow me to improve my communication with them.
Right.
So there's a number of skills that you're doing automatically. And that's why I said the opportunity to do this on your show and express how that's done really will make sense to yourself. And of course, to the listeners, they'll kind of see it and go, oh yeah, this makes sense. They'll be able to go back and say, well, wait a minute, there's a few things I could do that could improve my communication. A competent communicator is always learning, always growing, always getting better at this.
Right.
Yeah. So lots of fun.
Lots of fun, for sure. Oh, I've really enjoyed this.
Okay, great.
Thank you, because I love it when I go away thinking.
Well, and I know you're thinking all the time. So this will just accelerate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Ken. I really appreciate you coming back and sharing all of that with us. And I, as you said, I'm sure that the viewers will take a lot away with them, and they're communicating with the next person or with somebody. So it's always good to be able to not teach, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, I'm sharing. And,
yeah,
and honestly, if anybody out there needs to share or have some thoughts on this and they want to share further, happy to do so.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll make sure that, well, can I put you're on Facebook.
I'm on Facebook. So yeah, they can reach out to me on Facebook. I find opportunities to express, obviously I express my opinions, but also opportunities to reach out and connect with people through Facebook is commonly used. I use it quite readily. It can be a very good venue for that.
Right.
But again, remembering my competent communication skills, not everybody on Facebook is completely where they need to be. So we kind of work through we're trying to find out what's going on with that. So absolutely. Okay.
Thanks again for being here. I appreciate it. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. If you have more skills to share, I'm always ready to learn.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank everybody for watching. And wait for the groundhog. He's coming out.
Oh my goodness.
A sense of community, till it wax a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.